Welcome to another deep dive. You know I love to explore really complex topics in a way that everyone can understand. And today we're diving into the world of consciousness and the self.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is. But don't worry, we've got an expert in neuroscience with us who's going to help us break it all down.
Thanks for having me. Consciousness is a really fascinating subject, and this neuroscientist has some really groundbreaking ideas about how our sense of self actually emerges. It all starts with this idea that consciousness isn't just one thing, but actually has these two distinct types.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Two types. What are they?
He calls them core consciousness and extended consciousness.
Okay, I'm listening. What's the difference?
Well, core consciousness is all about being present in the moment, like totally immersed in the experience.
So if I'm like completely engrossed in a delicious meal
Mhm.
or lost in a beautiful piece of music.
Exactly. You're experiencing core consciousness. You're not thinking about the past or the future. You're just completely absorbed in the now.
Ah, I get it. It's like that feeling of flow, right? Where everything else just melts away.
Yes, exactly. And then we have extended consciousness, which is where things get really interesting. See, extended consciousness brings in our past and future, like our memories, our hopes, our plans. It allows us to reflect on our lives and imagine different possibilities.
So it's like core consciousness is the foundation, that raw experience of being aware. And then extended consciousness builds on that to create our sense of self.
Precisely. That narrative of who we are in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
So if you're planning your next vacation or thinking about a career change.
Yeah, that's definitely me thinking about the future. Okay, so that would be extended consciousness in action.
Exactly. And the fascinating part is that we shift between these two states all the time, even within a single event sometimes.
You know, now that you mention it, I've definitely experienced that. Like, I'll be in a meeting and I kind of zone out for a minute, but then I hear someone say a keyword and boom, I snap right back to attention.
Perfect example. Your brain was just taking in sensory information. But then something triggered that extended consciousness to kick back in.
It's like our brains have this zoom lens. It can narrow in on the present moment or widen out to encompass that whole sense of self and our place in time.
That is a really cool way to think about it. But, it makes me wonder, if we have these different levels of consciousness, what about other animals?
Right. Do they experience something similar? Like, could my dog be contemplating the meaning of life while he's chewing on his bone?
No, that's a great question. And, this neuroscientist actually believes that core consciousness is probably present in many species, especially those with complex brains and behaviors.
That makes sense. But, I mean, how can we really know what's going on in an animal's mind?
Well, we can't exactly ask a dog if it's having an existential crisis, right?
Right.
So scientists have to rely on what they observe and a little detective work. They look for clues in an animal's behavior, like its brain structure or even, signs of feelings.
Okay, so, for example, if a dog hides a bone to save for later, that suggests it's thinking ahead, not just acting on pure instinct.
Exactly. That behavior implies planning, which suggests some kind of internal mental process is happening. And then by comparing brain structures across different species, we can find even more clues.
It's like trying to decipher the secret code, looking for patterns and connections across different species to figure out how consciousness evolved.
Exactly. But we have to be super careful, right? We can't just project our own human thoughts and feelings onto animals.
Right, right. Avoid that anthropomorphism. But by studying their behavior and brains carefully, we can start to glimpse into their inner worlds.
I agree. It's fascinating to think about all the different ways consciousness might be expressed in the animal kingdom.
It really is. But speaking of hidden processes, what about our own unconscious minds, that stuff going on beneath the surface?
Ah, yes, the unconscious, always a mystery. And there's this thing called the cocktail party effect that gives us a really interesting peek into how it works.
The cocktail party effect. Oh, I think I know what you mean. Like when you're at a party, you're focused on one conversation, but then suddenly you hear your name mentioned across the room.
You got it.
Yeah.
You weren't consciously listening to those other conversations, but your brain was still processing them on some level.
So it's like your brain has the secret agent working in the background, constantly on the lookout for anything important.
That's a great way to think about it. It really shows how much our brains are doing without us even realizing it. Which kind of begs the question, if our unconscious minds are so efficient, why did we even evolve consciousness?
Yeah, good point. Why bother with all this conscious awareness if the unconscious is already handling so much?
Well, that's where this neuroscientist's ideas get really interesting. He suggests that consciousness offered this huge survival advantage, Like, it allowed organisms to become aware of their own existence, their own struggles, their place in the world.
Okay, so we went from just reacting to our environment to actually shaping it.
That's the idea. It's like going from driving on autopilot to having control of the steering wheel.
I like that analogy. Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, but I'm still curious about how this conscious self actually emerges. Like, what are the building blocks of this I that we experience?
Well, that brings us to the concept of the proto-self. It's like the bedrock upon which our sense of self is built. It's not your personality or your memories, but something way more fundamental.
Okay, if it's not our thoughts and feelings, then what is it?
Imagine it as the feeling of your heartbeat, your breath, the sensations of your body just existing in space.
So the proto-self is like this inner sense of me that's always there, beneath the surface of all our thoughts and actions.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And the neuroscientist even suggests this is where emotions come from. These raw, primordial feelings that arise directly from our physical being.
Whoa, so even complex emotions like love or joy are actually rooted in basic bodily sensations. That's wild.
It is pretty wild. And what's even more interesting, is that while our appearance and personality might change throughout our lives, this proto-self remains pretty stable.
It's like that inner anchor. It gives us a sense of continuity even as the world around us keeps changing.
Exactly. And, there's another layer to all of this, too. The brain actually uses these different maps to construct that proto-self,
Hmm.
like internal blueprints representing different aspects of our being.
Wait, maps. Tell me more about these maps.
Yeah, we've got master interoceptive maps, master organism maps, and sensory portal maps, all working together to construct that proto-self.
Okay, I'm ready to explore these maps. Let's start with the master interoceptive maps. What do those do?
Those are like dashboards for your body, constantly monitoring your internal state. Things like your heart rate, your temperature, whether you're hungry or thirsty.
So it's not just knowing that I'm hungry, it's about actually feeling that hunger, those raw sensations.
Exactly. And here's the cool part. Those feelings, those internal sensations, are actually the raw material for our emotions.
You're telling me that my gut feelings are literally shaping my sense of self? I knew there was a reason I trusted my gut.
Well, your gut is definitely part of the equation. And those gut feelings are deeply connected to the next type of map, the master organism map.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the organism map all about?
This one's all about your body structure and movement, how your brain knows where your limbs are in space, even if your eyes are closed. It allows us to move gracefully and with coordination.
Oh, so that's how I can reach for my coffee without having to look at it directly. My brain has this internal representation of my arm in relation to my body and the cup. Fascinating.
Precisely. And unlike the interoceptive map, which focuses on your internal environment, this organism map is constantly updating as you move and grow. But they both contribute to that core feeling of being embodied.
Okay, so we've got feelings from the interoceptive map and a sense of our body from the organism map. What about the third one, the sensory portal maps?
Those represent how you experience the world through your senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your skin. They're like windows to the world, constantly bringing in information.
So the sensory portal map is basically a map of where I am in the world, right? Experiencing things from my perspective. It's what gives me that feeling of being here now.
Exactly. And they create this sense of embodiment, this feeling that your experiences are happening to you right now at this point in space and time.
Love it. So we've got all these maps working together, interoceptive, organism, and sensory portal, creating this intricate, dynamic proto-self.
It's not just a bunch of static data points, though.
Yeah.
It's constantly responding to the world and shaping our experiences.
Yeah, it's a living, breathing thing. But how do we actually get from this proto-self to that thinking self, the part of us that makes decisions, sets goals, interacts with the world in this meaningful way?
That's a great question. And it leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore how the proto-self gives rise to what this neuroscientist calls the core self, the I, that experiences the world.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. I can't wait to hear how it all comes together.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the neuroscience of the self. Last time we explored that fascinating concept of the proto-self, that foundational sense of being grounded in our physical bodies.
Yes. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how that translates into the I. The part of us that thinks and feels and experiences the world. It seems like a big leap from just those basic bodily sensations.
It is a big leap. And this neuroscientist really dives deep into that complexity. He argues that the proto-self isn't just passively collecting data, It's actively shaping our experiences through constant interaction with the world.
So it's not just a blueprint or a static map. It's more like this dynamic system that's always evolving, always responding to new information.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Every time you reach for your coffee, you laugh at a joke or have a conversation, it creates this ripple in your proto-self. And those ripples trigger this cascade of physiological events that further shape your experience.
So like a feedback loop. My actions change my internal state, which then influences how I perceive and interact with the world.
You got it. And that interplay between the proto-self and the world, that's what creates this sense of continuity, this coherence in our lives. It's like the grounding wire connecting our inner world to the outer world.
Okay, I like that. But how do we go from feeling to thinking? How does the brain create the experience of an I that can actually reflect on its own existence?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. This neuroscientist proposes that the core self, the I, emerges when the brain introduces a protagonist into the mix.
A protagonist? Okay, that's intriguing, but is it like a little CEO in my head making decisions?
Not quite. It's not a separate entity or a mini-me. Instead, imagine it as the narrator of your life story, the one who experiences the world from that first-person perspective.
So the proto-self provides the stage, and the protagonist steps onto that stage to play the leading role.
That's a great way to put it. But remember, the protagonist isn't some independent agent calling the shots. It emerges from the complex interplay of the proto-self with all these other brain regions.
Okay, that clarifies things a bit. So it's not this separate entity, but more like a function of the whole system.
Yeah.
But how does this protagonist even emerge? What makes it appear?
Well, that's where it gets even more fascinating. The neuroscientist believes there are two key processes at play: binding and this emergence of subjectivity.
Okay, break those down for me. What is binding, and how does it contribute to the self?
Binding is how our brains take information from our senses, different brain regions, and even different moments in time, and integrate it all into a cohesive experience, like taking all those puzzle pieces and putting them together to make a complete picture.
So my brain is constantly weaving together sights, sounds, feelings, memories into this one unified stream of consciousness. It's what makes me feel like a whole person, not just a bunch of random perceptions.
Exactly. And this binding process is crucial for creating the sense of self, because it lets us experience all our thoughts, feelings, actions as belonging to one entity. Without binding, you'd be like a collection of fragments, not a unified self.
It makes sense. Without that, we wouldn't have that feeling of me that persists over time. We'd be like a ship without an anchor.
A great analogy. And that brings us to this emergence of subjectivity, that unique feeling of me-ness, experiencing the world from our own point of view.
Ah, subjectivity. That's really what makes us human, isn't it?
It is. And this neuroscientist suggests that subjectivity emerges when the brain takes all those bound together experiences and links them to the proto-self.
So the protagonist sees all these different elements of experience, and it's like it's saying, aha, these are mine. These are all part of me.
Precisely. And there might be certain brain regions involved in this, like the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, which we know deal with self-awareness and emotions.
So to recap, we've got the proto-self providing the foundation, the protagonist coming out through this binding and subjectivity, and bam, we've got a core self. It sounds so simple, but I'm sure those actual neural processes are incredibly complex.
Oh, they are incredibly complex. We're really just starting to understand how the brain does all this.
Yeah.
But, it's so exciting to be piecing together this puzzle, identifying all the players and their interactions.
It is. It's mind-blowing to think that something as intangible as the self can come from physical processes happening in our brains.
I agree. But before we go too deep into the philosophical side of things, let's dive back into how the proto-self is constructed. Remember those three types of maps: interoceptive, organism, and sensory portal. Let's break those down a bit more.
Yes. Let's get back to the maps. Let's start with those master interoceptive maps, the ones that create those gut feelings.
Back to the gut. So what's going on in the brain when we experience those basic sensations? Well, this neuroscientist points to the brain stem, that primitive part responsible for keeping us alive. Breathing, heartbeat, the essentials.
Exactly. And it turns out it also plays this crucial role in processing information from inside the body.
Wow, so even our most basic bodily functions are tied to our sense of self.
That's right. And the neuroscientist believes that specific nuclei in the brainstem actually generate what he calls primordial feelings. These are the raw sensations of our internal state.
Primordial feelings, I like that. It sounds ancient, primal. So, are you saying that emotions like love and joy are rooted in these basic sensations?
That's the idea. And because the brainstem is so fundamental, these primordial feelings are always there, humming in the background.
It's incredible to think that something so ancient is part of who we are today. But the brainstem can't be doing this alone, right?
You're right, it's not a solo act. The insular cortex, which is nestled deep inside the brain, is also really important for processing these feelings from the body.
Okay, the insular cortex, what does it do? Think of it as the brain's translator for body language. The brainstem might create those raw primordial feelings, but the insular cortex helps us make sense of them.
So it connects those feelings to our thoughts and memories.
Exactly. It helps us understand those feelings and weave them into our experience. It gives them that extra layer of nuance and meaning.
So the insular cortex is like personalizing the experience. It takes raw data and transforms it into something unique to me.
Precisely. It allows us to experience our internal state with so much more clarity and precision. For example, the brainstem might tell you that you're thirsty, but the insular cortex might connect that feeling to a memory of lemonade on a hot summer day. Makes you crave that specific drink.
Ooh, that's interesting. So the insular cortex is adding memories and associations to those raw feelings. But we've got two more maps to go. What about those master organism maps and sensory portal maps? How do those help construct the self?
Let's get to those. Those master organism maps, they represent our body's structure and movement. They're essential for creating a sense of agency.
Agency, meaning that feeling that we're in control of our actions.
Exactly. It's like an internal GPS.
Mhm.
It tracks our body's position and orientation. And these maps rely on a whole network of brain regions like the motor cortex, the somatosensory cortex, and the cerebellum.
So those are the brain regions that help us move with precision and grace. But how does that connect to our sense of self?
Well, this neuroscientist argues that our actions are actually an extension of ourselves. It's a way of expressing our will. And the master organism map helps us understand that we are the ones initiating those actions.
So it's not just knowing where my arm is in space, it's about knowing that I am the one moving it. It's that connection between my intention and my movement.
Precisely. That sense of agency is deeply tied to our sense of self. It's that feeling of, I am the one doing this.
It's about feeling ownership of our actions. Okay, and what about those sensory portal maps? How do they fit in?
Remember, those are the parts of our body that interact with the world. The eyes, ears, nose, skin the portals through which we experience all the richness and complexity of life. And they create this feeling of perspective.
So they're constantly reminding us that we are embodied beings experiencing the world from this particular point of view.
Exactly. And this neuroscientist suggests that they do this by integrating information from our senses with info about our body's position and movement.
So it's not just about seeing a sunset, it's about experiencing it from my perspective, standing here feeling the sun on my skin.
Exactly. It's about weaving together all those sensory inputs with your bodily awareness to create this truly personal experience.
Okay, this is all getting really complex, but I'm starting to see how it works. It's like this symphony. All these different sensations and feelings and movements orchestrated to create the experience of being a self. But what happens next? How do we get from this proto-self to the core self, to that fully realized I?
Well, that's the question we'll be tackling in the final part of our deep dive. Stay tuned as we explore the emergence of the core self and all its fascinating implications.
Welcome back to our final deep dive into the neuroscience of self. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? From consciousness to the proto-self and all those intricate maps of our inner world.
It has been a journey. And now we get to the big question. How does all of that, those maps, those feelings, that proto-self, how does it create the I, the core self that we all know and love?
Yeah, it's like we've got all the puzzle pieces, those basic elements, but we're missing that final step. How do they all come together? What's the missing piece?
This neuroscientist has a pretty compelling answer, I think. He suggests that the core self, the I, it emerges when the brain introduces a protagonist into the mix.
Okay, we've talked about this protagonist before, but I'm still a little fuzzy on what it actually is. Is it like some little CEO in my brain making all the decisions?
No, not quite. It's not a separate entity running around up there. Think of it more as the narrator of your life story, the one experiencing the world from a first-person perspective.
So the proto-self is like the stage, and the protagonist is the actor stepping onto that stage.
A great way to put it.
Yeah.
But the key thing is, the protagonist isn't some independent agent. right? It's not calling the shots. It emerges from that complex interplay between the proto-self and all those other brain regions. It's all connected.
Okay, so it's not the separate thing, but more like a function of the whole system. Got
Mhm.
it. But how does it actually emerge then? What makes it appear?
That's the question, isn't it? The neuroscientist thinks two things are at play. He calls them binding and the emergence of subjectivity.
Okay, so binding first. What's binding?
Binding is how our brains take information from our senses, from all the different brain regions and even from different points in time, and weave it all together into one cohesive experience. Imagine a chef taking all these different ingredients and blending them into this amazing dish.
So my brain is constantly taking all these sights, sounds, feelings, memories, and blending them into this one unified experience.
Exactly. And this neuroscientist says this process is crucial for creating a sense of self because it lets us experience our thoughts, feelings, and actions as belonging to one entity. Without binding, we just be a jumble of fragments,
Yeah.
not a unified me.
Without it, we wouldn't have that feeling of me that persists over time, would we?
Nope. We'd be like a ship without an anchor.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And what about the subjectivity? How does that come in?
Well, subjectivity is that feeling of me-ness.
Hmm.
The experience of the world from our own unique first-person point of view. It's what makes your experiences yours, not someone else's.
Ah, so that's the real essence of consciousness then, right?
You could say that, and this neuroscientist suggests that subjectivity emerges when the brain links those bound-together experiences back to the proto-self, that foundation we've been talking about.
It's like the protagonist is saying, hey, all these experiences, these are mine. This is my story.
Exactly. And there are probably some specific brain regions involved in this too, like the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, which deal with self-awareness and emotions.
So the proto-self lays the groundwork. The protagonist emerges through binding and subjectivity. And we've got a core self. It sounds so simple, but I bet the actual neural processes are incredibly complex.
Oh, incredibly complex. We're really just scratching the surface of understanding all this. But it's fascinating work, isn't it? Piecing together this puzzle.
It really is. And it's kind of mind-blowing to think that something as intangible as the self is actually the result of these physical processes in the brain. It makes you wonder what will happen to our sense of self as technology gets even more advanced, as those lines between the physical world and the digital world blur even more.
That's a great point. Even with all the advances we've made, there's still this huge mystery around how subjective experience actually comes from those neurons firing. How does it create the feeling of what it's like to be me?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And while we may never have a complete answer, the journey is pretty fascinating. And who knows what we'll discover next.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from those basic ingredients of consciousness all the way to the emergence of the core self. And while we still have a lot to learn, we hope you've gained a new appreciation for all the amazing things happening inside your brain right now.
And remember, next time you look in the mirror, you're not just seeing a reflection, you're seeing billions of years of evolution, this incredible neural architecture, and this profound mystery that we're just beginning to unravel.
It's a beautiful thought. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it.
The pleasure was all mine.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the human mind. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep wondering. The journey of discovery is never truly over.